Recently, we've been spending considerable time at Fort Meigs in Perrysburg, Ohio. In addition to the tremendously reconstructed fort, which spans 10 acres, the site also has an impressive museum. The collection includes numerous archaeological discoveries, such as a musket barrel with a bayonet still attached, numerous shell fragments, all of which are evidence of the two sieges the British and Native Americans placed the U.S. Army under on these historic grounds. The museum also displays personal effects of key individuals involved with those sieges, such as a letter stamp and watch fob, which were once possessions of British General Henry Proctor. But to me, the coolest artifact you'll find at Fort Meigs is not from the War of 1812 itself. Rather, it exhibits the long-lasting ramifications that conflict had upon U.S. politics. In this edition of Artifact Highlight, we'll be looking at relics relating to William Henry Harrison's 1840 bid for the presidency, an innovative but ultimately hollow campaign. Harrison is best remembered today for being a president of the United States, but how he got there is a bit of a mess to discern. What you need to know is that the Democratic-Republican Party became the dominant political faction in the aftermath of the War of 1812, in part because the battlefield successes that people like Harrison had achieved made most U.S. citizens feel good after enduring a 2.5-year stalemate. No, literally, they called the political period after the War of 1812 the era of good feelings. But by the 1830s, too many different ideas within the party had led to the Democratic-Republicans shedding members and restructuring as the Democratic Party. Andrew Jackson led these Democrats, but not without controversy. The Jacksonians had broadened the right to vote to nearly all white male citizens and championed free enterprise. But Jackson also terrified portions of the country due to how bold he was willing to go and exercise an executive power. See the nullification crisis for more on that. The Democrats also employed the spoil system to secure as many votes as possible, which disillusioned others. Some came to perceive the Jacksonian democracy as no more than a mob ruled by the uneducated. There was also the debate over the economics and morality of slavery within the United States, but slavery had long been a no-no word for anyone wanting to have an actual political career in the United States, so it was kind of hush-hush. It was there, but you didn't speak it outright. By 1836, Jacksonians amongst the Democrats had shaken the tree hard enough that their new presidential candidate, Martin Van Buren, had to face off against 4 opposing candidates, all of which were loosely affiliated with the Whigs, a new party which appealed to individuals wanting the federal government to be involved in maintaining the infrastructure, economy, and general social order of the country. Van Buren did succeed in being elected as the 8th president of the United States, but an economic depression shortly thereafter gave the Whigs a second chance. However, they knew even with the 1837 panic, a hard economic lesson would not be enough to sway voters to their cause. If the Whigs truly wanted to win, they needed a candidate who was more attractive to sell the hard economics. Now, in this situation, I know just who you need.
You are an ass. You are an ass. Where? He is there. There is the ass!
But watching us thumbs up become thumbs down right now on this video tells me you as the 1840s voters bloc are not yet ready for that, but your kids are gonna love it. So instead of running a harvest goddess, the Whigs went for a simpler strategy. Just copy and paste a Democrat strategy and run a war hero. Technically, they had already done this before. That was during the 1836 election when they ran former Major General William Henry Harrison. But when Harrison would run for a second time in 1840, this would be a far more intense campaign, the likes of which U.S. history had never saw before. When Harrison was formally nominated in December of 1839, a Democratic newspaper scoffed at the notion of the then 66-year-old running the country. Give him a barrel of hard cider and settle a pension of $2,000 a year on him, and my word for it, he will sit the remainder of his days in his log cabin by the side of a sea coal fire and study moral philosophy. These newspapermen were fools to say such a thing, because the most die-hard American will embrace an insult and turn it into a marketable slogan, and that's exactly what the Whig Party did. Whigs across the country would raise log cabins and give out hard cider to solicit votes. The image of Harrison being a humble man living upon the frontier came to be emblazoned on numerous publications. even if that was a complete lie, as Harrison had come from one of Virginia's most wealthy families. He had spent his childhood at a plantation, used his inheritance to kickstart his military career. But to be honest, who cared? Because when Harrison came to town, it was the greatest carnival that could be had. Cabin raising, ciders being consumed, and getting to hear the #1 song in the country, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Today, rallies are an essential component in one's quest for political power, especially in the United States. But in 1840, when travel could only be had by horse, boat, or on foot, such a campaign was unheard of. The log cabin campaign, as it became to be known, would be the measuring stick all future campaigns for the U.S. presidency would be measured by. And on July 11, 1840, that campaign came to the site of Fort Meigs, and thus brings us to a lovely collection of artifacts pertaining to that rally. All sorts of Chinaware was created honoring Harrison. I especially love these ribbons. For one, finding fabric surviving beyond a century immediately impresses me. Consider how quickly we wear out our clothes in a few years. But also note what events the Whigs were using to gain support. September 10th, 1813. They are tying Oliver Hazard Perry's naval victory at Lake Erie to Harrison, an infantry general. But in fairness, Harrison did provide Perry with last-minute manpower. You also see Fort Meigs is emblazoned on the ribbon, along with the Thames, the battle which saw Shawnee Chief Tecumseh killed. I could not get a high-quality image of this metal pin, but I believe it states Harrison in reform, with a log cabin in the middle. Reform referring to the federal intervention the Whigs desired to correct the supposed chaos of Jackson and Van Buren. Also exhibited is a cane which is engraved with slogans and imagery associated with the Whigs during that summer of 1840. But the most curious artifact is a massive log that's actually so big it protrudes from the display case. In the days leading up to the big rally at Fort Meigs, the Whigs of each township in Wood County donated logs to raise one of them Harrison log cabins. The first log did not last long, however. As a party of radical Democrats, derided as Locofocos, they would end up casting the log into the old fort well under the cover of darkness. This was just the start of a series of shenanigans between the Whigs and the Locofocos of the area on the grounds of Fort Meigs, which saw additional logs being sawed too short and the establishment of a constant guard of Whigs on the old battlefield. Ultimately, a cabin was raised in time for the day of Harrison's arrival. The ensuing rally may very well have been the largest campaign rally in Ohio history, at least up to that point. The Harrison log cabins were meant to be temporary. Most were disassembled as soon as the rally ended, so very little of them remains today. But for decades, locals in the Perrysburg area recall that first log stolen by the Locofocos protruding out of the ground. Eventually, it too disappeared. But during an archaeological dig in 1975, the well was rediscovered for Fort Meigs, along with the log of significance. And again, I just can't get over the fact that it's too big for the display case. I mean, imagine it. You're digging for these battlefield relics, and you have this giant stick protruding out. And then you would have to go digging into the newspapers to find this obscure story about these political factions fighting over logs. Like, this is just some crazy, weird history here. But here it is, a unique piece of American presidential history. And if you know of any other locations where you can see original portions of a Harrison log cabin, please let me know in the comments. I'm very interested in this story. So, did the log cabin campaign work? Well, yes. Harrison would win the 1840 election. At age 67, he would be the oldest person to be elected U.S. president until Ronald Reagan. It's worth noting that Harrison and the Whigs banked on the spectacle of the log cabin campaign, rather than actually establishing a party platform. Harrison was intentionally vague, having learned from past experiences in the U.S. Army, as well as politics, not to announce promises he may not be able to keep. But if there is one thing Harrison is remembered for in his presidency, it's not his military career before it, or his other political offices. It's the fact that he is the shortest-termed president in American history. He died just 31 days into his first term due to complications from pneumonia. With a lack of an advertised platform, it's really hard to predict what the U.S. would have looked like after having Harrison as a president for a full term. What we do know is Harrison's vice president, John Tyler, ascended to the presidency thereafter. And then he quickly broke from Whig policies, being more moderate in his intervention and advocating for the sovereignty of states. The Whigs would not return to the White House until the election of Zachary Taylor, but the political division across the country at that point had escalated beyond either party's ability to stop the fighting. The simple truth is, the debate over slavery had been ignored for far too long by the federal government. A day was inevitably going to come when the slavery debate would come to a bloody impasse. The only question when it would occur. Throughout the 1850s, the Democratic Party fractured over slavery, while the Whigs were absolutely eviscerated by even bringing up the subject. Now, some Northern Whigs would eventually reorganize with several other upstart factions, and they would develop the Republican Party, and in 1860 would narrowly elect a former Whig for the U.S. presidency by the name of Abraham Lincoln. And now that I've achieved my contractually required tie-in to the American Civil War, we can wrap up this episode of Artifact Highlights. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed finding out more of this weird history. The last Artifact Highlight was about the pot Anthony Wayne was rendered in. Now I'm talking about this piece of wood that was part of this log cabin, part of one of the first massive political campaigns in American history. So I guess Artifact Highlights starting to turn into the weird history section of Redoubt Productions. We'll see if that stays the course or not. If you enjoyed this video, though, hit the like button down below. If you want to follow us on our future adventures, consider subscribing here to the channel to Redoubt Productions. Be the first notified when a video releases. And if you want to go the extra mile of supporting us, keeping us on the road, and keeping me caffeinated when I'm making these videos, you can go to our Ko-fi page, links in the description below. For a small monthly fee, you may join the Garrison. It's our monthly membership program. And by joining the Garrison, you get access to behind-the-scenes footage, select scripts, early access to certain videos, and I'm always trying to make more bonuses for my Garrison. I appreciate them for their support, their unyielding support for maintaining this historical bastion of historical preservation. I said historical twice, but I've been reading the script one too many times because politics can get me tongue-tied. Tongue-tied? I can't speak anymore. We're gonna end this video. This was the video I decided to put Holo the Wise Wolf in. Why did I think that was a good idea? That was not a good idea. So we're just gonna wrap this up now before I ruin my integrity anymore. My integrity. I don't want to ruin it anymore. Bye.